You're listening to episode 186 of Mid-America Reformed Seminary's Roundtable Podcast. In this broadcast, the faculty of Mid-America discuss theology and cultural issues from a Reformed perspective. I'm Jared Luchabor, Director of Marketing. Thank you for tuning in. In today's episode, we hand the reins over to Dr. Andrew Compton, who will guide us through a conversation with Mid-America alumnus Reverend Tim McClymonds. As Dr. Compton looks at this topic with Reverend McClymonds, we're going to understand and explore how these dedicated individuals provide invaluable support, solace, and spiritual guidance to employees amidst the challenges of the workplace. Take a listen to their conversation.
My name is Andrew Compton. I teach Old Testament here at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, and we are continuing our series of chaplaincy ministries. And this afternoon, I'm excited to have a friend of mine, Reverend Tim McClymonds, join us from Christ Covenant OPC in Sheridan, Indiana. Reverend McClymonds is a 2007 graduate of Mid-America Reformed Seminary. And of course, the kind of neat connection we have is, even though I didn't go to Mid-America, I also graduated in 2007. And so that gives us a degree of solidarity as those who were so lucky to graduate in 2007 from seminary. There's a cadre of us around the world who take that pride very seriously. No, but anyway,
Amen.
Yeah, but no, thank you for joining us, brother. And of course, we're across the time zone, even though we're in the same state.
Yep.
So it's kind of a funny situation we have here. But how long have you been at Christ Covenant?
I've been at Christ Covenant for 3.5 years.
Okay.
So
Okay.
fall of 2019.
Wow. Yep. No, and I've been able to come down at least once. I know once I got thwarted, but was able to enjoy worshiping with the good folks down in Sheridan, and really neat. And we've crossed paths together.
They enjoyed having you, and they love Mid-America Reformed Seminary, as does their pastor. So I'm always trying to, when I get the opportunity to go on vacation, to call the seminary and bring one of you guys down. So we always love to have you come visit us.
And I think that historically the church has had some connection with Mid-America, right? Was when it became an OPC church, was part of that, as the pastor at the time was even taking some classes up here, becoming Reformed?
Right. Mark Melton. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was there when he was finishing up his studies as well. Okay. And we took different paths and came back together after a couple of years, in a crazy way that no one ever expected. So yeah.
It's neat to hear those kind of stories, and just neat when there's a kind of a relationship between the seminary and a particular church, that we've been able to just see those two organizations benefit from each other and help each other in ways.
Yeah.
So,
Amen.
Well, it's neat to talk today about business and corporate chaplaincy. You have experience in that. We've had some discussions already about prison chaplaincy that I think a lot of our listeners are maybe used to, hospital chaplaincy, military chaplaincy. Did I miss some, or have we done military yet? No, Jared's telling me no. But corporate and business, I think that would surprise a number of people in our churches and our circles, that there is such a thing. How did you get involved with this? And can you tell us more about what you did in corporate chaplaincy, and maybe even kind of expand our imaginations even beyond what you did to things you know of that other chaplains have done in that sort of venue?
Yes, well, it's quite the story. I mean, I came to Mid-America, at age 40, it had taken me a long, long time to really grab hold of, that the Lord was grabbing a hold of me and sending me, into the pastoral ministry. Just got into my first ministry, and we found out that my then wife, Nancy, whom many at the seminary will remember, had cancer. Eventually, she went to be with the Lord in 2014. And so I was there in Virginia at an OPC for almost 4 years. We made the decision to resign and go to Northwest Arkansas, where family lived. And it was there that while my wife was receiving care, I had taken up running, and I got involved in a 5K. And this guy's literally chasing me at the end. And I'm not that fast, but, male pride. I was like, I'm going to beat that one guy. And at the end, we're huffing and puffing. He goes, good job. We got to talking about, our lives. And he worked for this company that had chaplains. And I said, what in the world is that? a chaplain at a workplace, at a corporation, a secular corporation, because I'd spent 16 years in the corporate world.
Okay.
And that's those two things, faith and the workplace, were not encouraged to go together.
Mm-hmm.
So talking to this guy opened my eyes to this, and I started looking because I needed work. I was taking care of my wife and my son, but I needed employment pretty soon.
Sure.
And in God's grace, I went online and looked up corporate chaplaincy, and bing, Corporate Chaplains of America. And that's opening Fayetteville, Arkansas. And that's where I lived at the time. And so that is how, kind of chaplaincy came out for me.
Sure.
And so that is how I got involved in it. And it became a wonderful way, because at first the schedules, it was very flexible, and I had a lot of time to care for my wife and be there for her.
Mm-hmm.
I was on call 24/7, but I didn't have to be somewhere sitting in an office 8 to 5.
Sure.
Yeah, that was sort of the genesis of it. Anyway.
Interesting. What was the size of the company you got involved in, and what type of company even?
So the interesting thing is, Corporate Chaplains of America was my employer.
Oh, okay.
And what they do is they have a whole department that goes and researches and tries to find ministry workplaces that are going to be mission locations for them to send chaplains to, and then they go about recruiting chaplains from various denominations, not just Reformed. So
yeah.
I was one of the few, probably Reformed and Presbyterian ministers that was doing that. And so there were several companies that were in our area. And I think at that point they were capping it. You had like 1,000 employees, could be cobbled together from 5 companies. It could be one big company that you served, but 1,000 employees was your full time. You were considered a full-time chaplain, but below that, you were part-time.
Okay. Now, what would it look like then? Now, it sounds like you had multi-sites that you would go to.
Yep.
I know you can't really answer the question, what would an average day look like? But what were some ways in which you had ministry opportunities in those various sites that would differ from, say, even what you have now as a pastor at a local church, where, yeah, sure. I mean, and I had this too, where you'd go out and have lunch with somebody in your congregation as they took their lunch break. But how were some of those opportunities different in a way? What were some of the ways in which a day of ministerial labors would look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because one of the biggest things is that, when you're a pastor, like a solo pastor of a church, the people that come there usually are people that want to be there. Mm-hmm. They come seeking spiritual input. But when people go to work, they're going to work. And they're not expecting some guy to come around their cubicle and, ask them how they're doing. Hmm. And so probably the biggest challenge is to overcome barriers of what, not only your own internal fears, like, what are these people going to think of me? But how do I step into this place seamlessly and not distract them from their work, but also do what their leaders have hired and contracted with us to do, that is, be there for them for spiritual input. And so you're constantly building relationships. You're constantly learning how to walk into a place and read the temperature of the room. If someone's on the phone and it's pretty clear they're cutting a deal, you don't step in and sit it down in their chair and go, now, can we talk now?
Time to be spiritual, buddy.
Exactly. So it's learning to get in there. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the agency that I work for is that they required 7+ years in the business world for their chaplains, but you also had to have some type of commissioning from your church, and you had to have either a 4-year Bible degree or a seminary degree.
Okay.
So you had to have some savvy in the workplace, but they wanted you to know the Bible and be able to minister Christ to people. but yeah, it was a challenge of getting in there and being there, being available, but not being the whole show. When you didn't know if people were going to want you there or not.
Well, and it is interesting what you're describing, because we've talked with hospital chaplains, prison chaplains, and in those settings, here is a group of people. In the prison setting, they've sort of hit rock bottom in some ways. In the hospital setting, most of the people you're ministering to things are not going well physically for them, and there's in some ways something of a receptive soil. Maybe not as often the case, but here's something that I find fascinating, is that there's an increasing recognition among even employers that employees are not just sort of bio-robots, who are
Exactly.
who are doing work for them. They're viewing their employees in holistic ways. So that it's got to be kind of interesting that you have the support of higher ups who recognize that employees need a holistic atmosphere to work well, but maybe employees go back and forth about how much they think how holistic they feel. I mean, how would you kind of, what did that look like to even get to know people and the kinds of challenges that employees were facing in a corporate setting?
So I think one thing that really is helpful, number one, is just, this sounds really simple and basic, but it's just to be a real, authentic human individual. When you go there, you don't put on religious airs, and you shouldn't do that anywhere. You shouldn't do that in pastoral ministry. You should just be who you are.
Right.
Be who God made you to be. And people recognize that type of, I hate to say authenticity because everybody uses that as the buzzword, but honestly, people recognize it. People have savvy. They know, okay, this guy's trying to steer me to a conversation. Or no, this guy he likes me, and he just wants to know, why did I pick purple for my new hair color? Why did I, and so then you notice things about people, and you genuinely learn to enjoy people and love talking to them. And so I would come in, I would pray, but I would just walk in and just let it happen. Let the Lord lead. And if somebody looked like they're having a bad day and they kind of looked like they were open, I would say, you doing all right today? And sometimes there'd be, no, that's just my focused look, when I'm having a problem at work, I'm figuring it out. And sometimes it'd be like, okay, here come the tears, something, my mom just got sick and, we're afraid, and the other thing was knowing the balance. People, I wasn't afraid to share my story of what I was going through with my wife's illness.
Yeah.
And I think that gave some street cred for me. That was, for people like, oh, this he's suffering, his wife's suffering, but here he is, he's in my cubicle and he's smiling, and he wants to know how I'm doing. And there must what's going on? And so just being that genuine in the moment, this is what's going on in my life. Just like you do for your neighbor, your neighbor's lawnmower doesn't work and you're good with lawnmowers. You're like, hey, Jim, can I help you with the lawnmower? And who knows where that's going to lead.
Can you give any, examples? Of course, keep things, as generic as you like, but what were some, I don't know if breakthroughs is the right word. So what are some experiences you had where there were just really neat, really exciting ministry opportunities that took place?
Yeah. There were a lot of very interesting things. One of the things that really comes to my mind is that I remember there were two guys, and there were a lot of Hispanic workers in this one particular place, and two guys in particular had they were sort of macho, never smile, hardworking factory laborers.
Okay.
And those guys would either ignore me, walk on the other side of the aisle, or glare at me.
Okay.
And that went on for a couple of years. Finally I made breakthroughs just by patient, being that guy that, showed up every day, once a week for 5 or 6 years and just smiled at them no matter what they did. Had some breakthroughs with, one guy, his family back in Mexico just was falling apart. And finally he was like, how can you help? Can you pray for me? And that led to a deepening friendship and a relationship. Another guy, the same type of thing. And it's usually when something goes wrong. They're like, well, maybe I'll try the chaplain. And all those years of just saying hi, just there were these breakthrough moments, and there was a friendship. And one guy, was asking, well, okay, what does the Bible mean by this? And it led to opportunities to share the gospel. Another guy was ready to lose his job. He was a good worker, but they wanted to change his workstation and take his guys that he had trained and cross-train them. To him, that was taking away his turf, his domain, and it led to problems with his boss. Finally, they gave him an alternative because he wasn't showing up to work, and they said, you talk to the chaplain or you're done. Well, we sat down, a couple of hours conversation, and he just unloaded. And I was able to go back and communicate to the employee, this is why this seems little to you, but to him, this is his world. This is the thing that he has made, that these guys are his team, they're his homies. And, it's like you're taking my family away from me. That's how it meant to him. And, he was able to keep his job. And, I can't say that he did the hard work. He came and sat down with the chaplain, but it facilitated a conversation. And, there are lots of other stories, but those are just two things, where, I felt like, okay, I was able to kind of make a difference there.
It's neat that even hearing that you're able to, in that sense, I wondered if you would find yourself in situations where you're running, I don't know if the right word is running interference, but at least running communication back and forth. And
with permission, always with permission. That's the key between, always honoring that confidentiality.
Got it. Sure. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Well, and I've been in my own, in some of my doctoral work, I wound up learning about vocational psychology, which is just it's a subdiscipline, but it's why we have even career counseling. That's the kind of thing that we're used to seeing even in Christian high schools, is you have a career counselor of some kind. All that's born out of a sense of trying to understand how people think about their work. But I was amazed to see that so many segments of development departments or career advancement departments, even in corporations, are using not only psychological observations, but they tap into the language of calling. And even if it's an organization that isn't Christian in any sense or isn't religious, completely secular, they're very comfortable using the language of calling because it's recognized that humans find meaning in their work. I mean, especially the story you just told. Like, it's not simply a petty thing. Here's a guy. It could, of course, be that the guy's just being cocky, but no. Most people are recognizing these days that people identify with their work and find meaning in their work in pretty profound ways. So that understanding those dynamics, on the one hand, it helps from merely a pragmatic managerial side of things, but it also taps into something that we can make sense of because we believe that God created all things and he created humans and he gave them a work mandate, fill the earth and subdue it, and that we're we're intended to work and find our work as something related to our essence as human beings made in God's image.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I found that, this guy, if we had crossed on the street, I might have been scared of him. The way, the chains and the tattoos, and, but here we were put together, this seminary graduate guy, who listens to Bach and loves classical music and fine coffee, and here we're sitting together in this conference room with one another. And then after that, he didn't hear me judge him. He didn't hear me say, well, you're being a bad employee. He heard somebody there to listen and to go, wow, that's pretty cool that you have that connection with the guys you trained, and you know what, your company recognizes how well you do and how seriously you take your job. And he was able to feel that pride. Okay, they appreciate me, but they want to give my other guys other skills and cross train them. and he got some understanding, and they got some understanding, and it was sort of a peacemaking role. But yeah, you're right. It was honored that innate desire and calling that we have as image bearers to work hard, pursue a calling.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rapport building when you're a corporate chaplain to try to make sure people realize, hey, this guy isn't going to come in and throw the Bible at me. Mm-hmm. He's going to respect my work atmosphere. But over time, I'm going to find out he's approachable because he's not going to invade my space. He's going to honor that space. It's all about permission to share the gospel. But that was the goal. It was ultimately to share the gospel if God gave the opportunity.
How can the broader Christian community, how can churches, how can even Christian business owners get involved in corporate chaplaincy efforts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we were chatting earlier. I hadn't even heard of such a thing, and most people haven't heard of such a thing. And when I would tell people what I do, when I would visit, just we'll go to church. Really? Corporate chaplaincy? Never heard of it. So first of all, we can talk about it. I love the fact that you guys are doing this podcast and included corporate chaplaincy. So just speaking about it, obviously educating our churches. Most people don't know it exists, but I think what it's born out of is having a burden for the American workplace and seeing it as a mission field. Not just, we're used to in the Reformed faith going, everything that we do, we are to do to the glory of God, whether I eat, whether I drink, whether I'm, taking care of the baby or cutting the lawn, or whether I'm, doing high finance and brokerage deals. Whatever I do as my calling, I'm to do it for God's glory if I'm a Christian. But to also see it as a mission field, as a way to bring the life-saving good news of Jesus Christ to this workplace. And so, talking to, for example, Christian entrepreneurs in your churches, asking them how do they care for their leaders or for their employees. A lot of Christian employers have this burden for their employees, but they have a business to run too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just not going to be the best venue for your boss to hear about your problems with your wife or your addiction problem. But if there's someone else in there, so churches, how can churches get involved in this? I was trying to brainstorm this. Non-church kingdom ministries are leading the way right now, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Sure.
But there might be churches doing this kind of thing, and I'm not aware of it. But I don't see why a congregation or a presbytery or a denomination couldn't see this as a mission field, couldn't ordain men specifically as evangelists to do this. We do like to think in terms of church planting. Mm-hmm. So, I can see where there might be some tension there with some presbyteries, where this is just sending someone to evangelize. But for example, I think the PCA, they have Reformed University Fellowship that focuses on campuses. I don't know what kind of churches get planted out of that, but a lot of young people get the gospel ministered to them through that way. Building relationships with chaplains in their area that they know, so that those employees can, or rather those chaplains who minister to the employees in those companies can feed employees to churches so that they can get discipled and learn more about Christ in a churchly context. And then the final thing I wanted to say there on this was, where I used to live in Northwest Arkansas, there was an organization called Work Matters. And my understanding is it started as a church ministry, but now they serve to facilitate the networking of Christian business people through conferences. They'll bring in top name Christian speakers, CEOs of big companies, to give talks, particularly about integrating faith in the workplace. And you can tag into that. As a pastor, or maybe a pastor and some elders can go and tag up. You can get a table at one of those places. You can bring entrepreneurs from your church, and you can sit down and then you can meet people and you can learn about how can we network with other people. Because I don't, besides that, I'm not really sure I don't know of other churches in the Reformed world that have chaplain ministries beyond what you might think of the traditional hospital or or police or fire,
military,
that kind of military.
Yeah, wow, and even something we were talking about earlier. I mean, there's on the secular side of things, they're seeing the spiritual implications of work, but even on the Christian side of things, there's been just a burgeoning of books in recent years on work. Tim Keller has a book, Every Good Endeavor. And one of the interesting chapters even in that book is, I think it's called like Why Work is Hard, right? We live in a fallen world, and even the workplace is a place where there's rebellion, there's brokenness, there's hurt, there's meaninglessness. It's granted the days of the Industrial Revolution, where the jungle, Upton Sinclair's book, of charting the horrible abuses of the Industrial Revolution in some ways. Admittedly, a lot of that's gone. We have OSHA, we have groups that are trying to ensure a healthier workplace, but the curse is still at work, and there's a lot of people punching the clock 9 to 5 who are just empty. And what an amazing opportunity to bring the meaning-generating worldview to bear in a place that needs it so bad. And I'm glad you mentioned church planting. We, of course, we see the need for it. We need gospel preaching. Our Center for Missions and Evangelism here is trying to equip churches in evangelism, equip them in church planting. But I'm struck, too, that a lot of guys are just not, they're just not gifted to be very effective church planters. Where does that put them? But they are equipped and gifted in other kinds of venues as well. And this is just this has kind of opened my eyes to see a way in which men who have a heart for sharing Christ, a heart for ministering the gospel, here's another venue where they may indeed have gifts that would be appreciated, yes, that would be suitable, yes, but are so needed. A way to bring the true view of the world, the true story of the world, where yes, life is hard, yes, work is hard, but work is valuable, and God is deriving glory for Himself, and He's bringing in His sheep, even in these kinds of relationships.
Yeah, people are spending so much time working, and they may not, in our age, be so inclined to come to church. But and I know this is a little cliche-ish again, but if church comes to them, if there's an emissary that comes to their workplace, a place where they're comfortable and they're feeling like they're on top, they're doing their thing that they know how to do, that's another inroad. It might take time. It might take a couple of years, but something's going to happen in their life. And that chaplain is going to be there to be a sounding board, and perhaps in God's timing and God's marvelous providence, be able to share the life-changing good news of Jesus Christ for that person.
Very cool. Wow. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for sharing this. I hope our listeners have found this as thrilling as I have. I mean, just the idea of the workplace, even the workplace is yet another field, a mission field, white for the harvest.
Yeah, amen.
May God send laborers there. Thank you, brother. We've had a great time.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. It's been great.
Next week, we'll begin an important 3-part series on pastoral visitations. We'll hear from Reverend Paul Ipema on ministering to 3 different groups of people you may find in your church: the elderly, troubled youth, and the sick and dying. Understanding how to compassionately support these groups through times of hardship is critical for anyone pursuing ministry, even for those in the pew seeking to be the hands and feet of Jesus to their fellow brother or sister. Make sure you tune in next time on Roundtable. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and sharing it with friends or family. Your support helps us bring more engaging content to your ears and helps us foster not just a community of lifelong learners, but thoughtful practitioners. I'm Jared Luchbor. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.